Dear English literature learners, I'd like to give you some idea on broad questions with answers on the Reformation Age, Part C. My next video will be on brief questions with answers on the Renaissance, Elizabethan, Jacobean and Puritan Age, Part A. Reformation Age, Part C. Broad questions with answers. Question 1. What do you understand by the Reformation? How did it check and retard the Renaissance in England? Give a reasoned answer. Or, what was the impact of Reformation on the Renaissance in England? Answer. The background of the Elizabethan socio-political life influenced two great movements, the Reformation and the Renaissance. The Reformation movement began and completed before the Renaissance. It began during the reign of Henry VIII, the father of Queen Elizabeth I and the King of England. It continued through the reign of Edward IV and of Mary, Queen of Scots, till the accession of Queen Elizabeth. In fact, the entire period was a period of religious movement in English religio-political life. The national focus was on the liberation of the Church of England from the authority of the Roman Church. This liberation movement is known as the Reformation. It is also known as the Protestant Revolution because it could establish the Reformation Church or Protestant Church, making a complete break with Roman Church. This movement was greatly influenced by German leader Martin Luther and spread all over Europe, leading to the establishment of the Protestant Church. In England, the Reformation movement and the Renaissance came together. The Reformation had its impact on the Renaissance literature. In fact, the literary and cultural history of Renaissance will not be understood without a reference to the Reformation and its influence on it. We may, in this connection, refer to such authors as Marlowe, Spencer, Shakespeare, and even to Milton. Milton alone represents the Puritan rule and its interest in the history of religious evolution against the Church of Rome. In fact, Protestantism is a human interpretation of Catholic religion. It is a modern attitude to Christian religion. There is another important event to note is the translation of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and its publication in 1611. This version is known as the Authorized Version of our King James Version. This version contributed to the national life of Renaissance and Reformation of Europe. So we can say that the literature of the 16th century was profoundly influenced by the religious ideals of the Renaissance, which is known as the Reformation. In Italy, the new impulses were chiefly turned into secular and often corrupt channels. Martin Luther protested against the unprincipled and flippant practices that were disgracing religion. This protest began the breach between Catholicism and Protestantism. The Protestant demanded the independence of church. Luther's action influenced the people in England. The English nation as a whole began to move more rapidly towards change. They struggled for culture and peaceful reform. The course of a religious movement in England was determined largely by the personal and political projects of Henry VIII. Later on, he was given the title Defender of Faith by the Pope when Henry attacked some of the ideals of Luther about the reformation of church. But Pope was unwilling to give total freedom to the Protestants, especially in matters of marriage and personal liberties. Pope refused Henry's demand for divorce from Catherine of Spain and the marriage with Anne Boleyn. This is how a separate English church, Anglican church, or Reformed church, or Protestant church in England was established. In the brief reign of Henry's son, Edward VI, the separation was made more decisive. But the last of Henry's children, Elizabeth, came to the throne in 1558 and gave the final victory of the English Church. Elizabeth, by her statesmanship, ushered in a long era of social, religious, and political peace and stability. Queen Elizabeth adopted a middle course policy and completed the course of English Reformation by giving a permanent character to the Anglican Church. She won over the moderate man of the Catholics and the Puritan. Her church settlement was political compromise between Catholicism and Puritanism, between the Church of Rome and the Church of Geneva. Personally, Elizabeth was indifferent to the various religious creeds. She looked upon it from a political point of view. Hence, her compromise formula did not please the Catholics and the Puritans. The Puritans left England for America and established there a colony called New England. It led to commercial rivalry with the Catholic countries of Spain and Portugal. The frequent encounters between the sailors expanded England's naval power. One of the effects of Reformation was that it evolved a kind of religious of home, especially middle class, and quite unmedieval. It became a social customs common to all English Protestants. The squires, merchants, yeomen accepted the new faith and was widely expanded among the cottages of the poor. The Reformation left its mark upon English literature. It produced the English Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. It also produced a number of tracts, treatises, sermons, and books of devotion. It gave an impetus to the use of the vulgar tongue in worship. To sum up, we can say that the Reformation, like the Renaissance, left distinct marks upon the national literature of England, and it had, in fact, strong enough to the national life of England and brought about the same religious as well as political upheaval. In fact, it fostered the trend to the critical and constructive revolt in religion, resulting in the upsurge of Puritanism. Question 2. Discuss the impact of Reformation in the growth of English literature. The Reformation was essentially a religious movement, and it made its emergence in Western Europe in the 16th century. The Reformation was based on the opposition of the people to the claims of papal authority and the Church of Rome. It had the avowed aim to reform and renew the Church, but proved to be finally a great force against it. But this movement, the Reformation, as the name indicates, was the reformed movement of the Church, lost in corrupt practices and diverse vices. It had this success with Lutheranism and the abandonment of the Catholic Church in many European countries, particularly in England. The Reformation of England was at once a religious, political, social, and economic revolution. It had an intimate involvement in the cultural and literary aspects of England. Under its impact came the translation of the Bible, the Book of Common Prayer, and a number of religious tracts, treatises, sermons, and devotional books. The translation of the Bible was made by two devout reformers, Miles Coverdale and William Tyndale. Tyndale's translation of New Testament was published in 1525, followed by Coverdale's translation of the Old Testament in 1535. This translation of the Bible was found to have made remarkable contribution to the development of the English language, particularly of English prose. The introduction of the Bible indicates with force and ease had tinged much English literature and given it a richness of style. Such translation may well be taken as the appropriate preparations for the momentous authorized translation of 1611, a grand achievement of Elizabethan literature. The effect of the Reformation is perceived in the compilation of the prayer book from Latin under the title The Book of Common Prayer in 1949. It is found to have a sponsoring effect on the growth of English language by means of appropriate cultivation of the classical language. The revival of the learning intimately related to the Reformation had its firm steps on the English soil with John Colet, a theologian who had studied in Paris and Italy. He was a personal friend of Erasmus, a great name in the spread of classical knowledge in the European continent. Colet was a vastly learned scholar of classical language, and as the dean of St. Paul's, introduced the new learning into the secondary education of Cathedral School of St. Paul. John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, had a role in the revival of learning in England. He was the author of a number of Latin works. Richard Crook, a Greek scholar who became the reader of Greek at Cambridge, was a strong and active supporter of the spread of the new learning in England. Finally, there was Sir Thomas More, a great scholar and humanist who had immense knowledge in Greek and Latin. He was a friend of Colet, Lilly, and Erasmus. He was the author of a number of Latin works. He finished his famous work, the Utopia, in 1516. This single work, though written in Latin, was a memorable event in the history of English literature. More's Utopia is deemed, of course, quite rightly as the true prologue to the Renaissance. It remains a memorable literary venture in the making of a new and modern literature in England. Its impact on the making of English Renaissance literature is not at all ignorable. Utopia is an epoch-making work which has been variously practiced as the first monument of modern socialism, the masterpiece of English humanism, and the true prologue to the Renaissance. Two important names after Sir Thomas More are Sir Thomas Elyot and Sir Thomas Wilson. Elyot was known only by his book The Governor, a treatise on education written for those who would be called to govern the country. His prose is restrained and classical in spirit. Wilson, in his book The Art of Rhetoric, advocates purity and simplicity of language. He is a purist who is against the wholesale importation of foreign words. Another Reformation and preacher was Hugh Latimer. He simplifies and classifies and writes in short, well-constructed sentences. His phrase glow with emotion and religious fervor. His sermons exercised a greatly healthy influence on the development of English prose. So, Sir John Cheke was another of the great reformationists of the period. In his book, Heart of Sedition, he shows himself to be a conservative opposed to the frequent risings against the king. His prose is vigorous and eloquent, and livened at places by touches of humor. To sum up, it can be said that there are some works of scholarship based on the study of the classics. The need of these religious reformers discussed above to speak to the people led to them to use this plain, neglected English, and in this way, development of English prose. Thank you for watching. I am Shamim Sarwar. My next video is on brief questions with answers on the Renaissance, Elizabethan Jacobean Puritan Age party. Have a nice day.